Before we get into vertical integration and the regulatory vacuum that's defined the CBD economy today, we first want to grasp the hinge that made it all possible. So I'm going to split this episode into two parts. Part one is about the hinge, and what you're going to hear is a legislative side door story where Section 7606 from the 2014 Farm Bill creates a language that most legislatures and most in the public hardly notice, but some people that really care about this noticed immediately the association, although you can't really separate the two, right? But for research reasons, you can. Legally, you can, is what I mean. This enabled states and universities to produce what had previously been restricted for about 70 years. This is where it all starts, though. This is when Congress, in February of 2014, normal day, Congress is assuming that it's updating the agricultural policy and a shift in infrastructure. Clinical evidence, the benefits on severe childhood epilepsy are coming to light, and CBD begins to have a reputation in specifically pediatric neurology wards before it becomes available in wellness stores. So part one is really about laying the groundwork, the prime policy changes, the scientific realities, the chronology of how this molecule that was long consigned to the edges of cannabis biochemistry and restricted in terms of research, all of a sudden is sanctioned in laboratories and finally allowed into retail shelves. Part two, we're going to look at what people do with that opportunity, specifically the emergence of vertical integration in brands like Sunsoil, soil to oil, right, operations. Hemp became a commodity before CBD could be licensed as medicine, but we'll see how it became that too. Imagine the United States in the early 2010s, a country that is cautiously emerging from the gloom of a drug war that is not working, squinting as it adjusts to a fresh cultural and political landscape, featuring law, Amendment 64 in Colorado. 2012, this vote seemed like a quirky little adventure, playful experiment in the land of the Rockies. But beneath those cheerful headlines and the nervous chatter from federal authorities, a more profound transformation was underway. The public was rethinking a long-standing, fear-laden relationship with a certain green plant that they had been schooled to dread for the past 70 years. Yes, I'm going there today. Cannabis, once the villain of lurid PSAs and political speeches and policies, now being reintroduced to the public as a regulated commodity that could be taxed, labeled, carded. Imagery shifted almost overnight. Throughout the 2010s, there was what we would call a punctuated equilibrium of changes. The imagery shifted from contraband to boutique retail, back alley transactions to glass front dispensaries with parking signs that reminded you to park in the designated spots. Legalization was not just about a policy change. CBD specifically will be the topic of today. In the bright glow of THC, cannabis's headline molecule, charismatic center of decades of legal argumentation and subcultural identity, being pushed back finally, old tired narrative that we have about cannabis. It was quietly taking on a new life of its own, specifically this molecule called cannabidiol or CBD. Plants steadier, non-psychoactive, no hallucinogenic effects, in other words, stepped forward from the background of the biochemistry labs into a frenzy of public consumer culture in the mid to late 2010s. CBD had none of the glamour of THC. It did show promising effects for a few things. There were some anti-inflammatory benefits, sleep supportive benefits, and most importantly, in terms of evidence, it seemed to be highly effective at treating epileptic conditions. The way to enjoy the rebranding of cannabis is going to be the focus of today. Without the psychoactive effects, though, this still seems to make some regulators nervous. Although for some reason, alcohol doesn't. Let's go back to 2014. Let's get in our time machine and go to 2014 and look at, specifically in February of that year, the Farm Bill that stepped in and opened the door for hemp-based research projects. In 2014, and there are listicles coming up on my browser from BuzzFeed, 27 signs that I'm making coffee the wrong way, reasons that I'm basically a Disney princess, dogs who are too pure for this world, then which 90s Nickelodeon show am I? This is their BuzzFeed's Prime. There's also, right, the aesthetic of fandom hyperventilations. There's also memes. What does the fox say? Turn down for what? Overuse in every Vine. Those imaginable Vines also are very popular. And there's also streaming is really popular already. Breaking Bad has just ended the previous September. Of course, Frozen and Let It Go. Everyone is singing it. to themselves, and I am now in my head. Also important is what's happening behind the scenes. If I'm stepping out of a time machine in February of 2014, also seeing within the United States a country that's no longer in the throes of a crisis, still carrying muscle memory of it, that deep freeze between 2007 and 2009 is behind. Moved on. Economy has been rebuilding itself for several years through job growth, consumer confidence, and innovation sectors. It's a strange, undeniably aspirational economic moment with cautious momentum and a willingness to experiment, specifically with this farm bill. It's easy to miss the pivot happening in Washington because nothing about this day really feels revolutionary. But this bill, beneath the thrones of procedural voting, there's a single quietly transformative clause known as Section 7606, and a legislative staffer huddled over text with a scarf warmed to her ears probably looked slightly at it and said, wow, this lets states grow hemp legally, and no one reacts around her. But people are thinking about it around the lunch and around the next committee hearing and how to maybe more than a research exception. The language is very clinical. There's not a lot of fanfare. There's no predictions. There's no mentions of CBD, although it would lead to this. Most lawmakers though are imagining fibers and ropes and maybe t-shirts, I don't know, a revival of colonial agriculture. What they don't realize though is that modern research authorization also contains an entire blueprint for a future multi-billion-dollar industry that brings about CBD. As a result of this, in the weeks that follow this February 2014 passage of the Farm Bill, Colorado is starting to draft hemp pilot plans. Kentucky farmers are dusting off old seed catalogs. Oregon and Vermont agricultural departments are preparing test fields, and university researchers are beginning to file proposals with a mix of curiosity and a sense of disbelief that this is happening. It opens up an entire new boom for an economy in wellness, in research, in product development and innovation. Farmers don't know yet that CBD is going to become a centerpiece of this. Congress doesn't know it. The FDA doesn't know it. Consumers don't know what CBD means. I don't know what CBD means if I'm in 2014, but this is a moment that people did not see coming, and yet retrospectively, it's easy to see how this developed. So I want to talk about that today. The language is very clinical. It says specifically that industrial hemp may be grown by state departments of agriculture and institutions of higher education. This time machine just caught the glow that history won't recognize until years later, because the truth is simple. Congress thinks that it is adjusting agricultural policy, and they're also legalizing something that actually has real benefits to economy. They're rethinking old assumptions and making moves to build a future that's not based on the past, but it's based on the present reality of promise, research, and innovation. 2014, the Farm Bill stepped in and opened the door for hemp research pilot projects, allowing CBD a chance to shine like a star at a surprise party. Hemp provided something that was previously restricted in the same legal framework as a psychoactive relative known as THC. It was now free to roam, hemp at least, in the realms of science and commerce eventually. A compound that was almost unknown a decade ago then suddenly appeared as tinctures, balms, beverages, pet treats, face creams, body washes, elegant end caps at the high-end grocery stores. CBD wasn't following along with THC though. It was carving out its own space, and that space involved as the legalization of cannabis and THC specifically went from Colorado then to Washington, to Oregon to Alaska, California to Nevada, and then to Massachusetts, and then beyond that even. In the late 2010s, CBD went on a path that was just as exciting, if definitely more surprising. CBD also landed in places that weren't expected. Kentucky, Kansas, and Alabama. It was carving out its own space, evolving in addition to those other places. It was carving out its own space and evolving into CBD positioned itself as a part of leisure, providing a relaxed atmosphere without the baggage of hallucination. It enabled users to use cannabis in a way that was normal without plunging headfirst into the euphoric deep end. So behind this rise was a deeper tension though. The popularity of CBD blossoming created a vacuum in terms of its regulation. It was fully legal to grow hemp. By the 2018 Farm Bill, it was fully legal to produce it at mass scale. Companies began operating with meticulous care in some cases, and in others with chaotic improvisation, all trying to build a consumer base in a marketplace where credibility itself did not have a regulatory anchor. CBD, in other words, becomes the country's most successful unregulated therapeutic experiment, although that's an overstatement considering the lack of regulation around the wellness industry in general. multi-billion-dollar case study in how Americans seek relief. This is a hinge. This is the fulcrum of legality, beliefs, science, and in-market improvisation that our episode starts today. In Section 7606 in the 2014 Farm Bill, it doesn't legalize outright. It creates a state-run hemp research pilot program. This allows states to formally approve research on hemp, legal domesticated hemp that's cultivated for research and derived, and then eventually legal hemp-derived CBD extraction within that research framework. Universities and agricultural scientists and medical researchers can work with hemp-derived CBD. So one thing that they found, research from 2014 to 2018, they found that CBD reduced public speaking anxiety in public simulated social stress tests. Animal models showed anti-stress effects connected to what is known as the 5-HT1A receptor modulation. Let's look at this in the context of how CBD interacts with this receptor. So if your brain is full of neighborhoods, so those neighborhoods could be anxiety neighborhood, tension neighborhood, calm neighborhood, and the 5-HT1A receptor is a special operator on a hotline that's dedicated to calming everything down. This acts like an emergency dispatcher whose entire job is to assess incoming stress signals from the city, determine whether they're legitimate threats, and if they're not, the citywide, hey, stand down, calm down message. CBD was found to clear the lines, give a more decisive answer from the dispatcher, reducing static between the lines, if we're using this metaphor, of networks, because CBD acts like a partial agonist at the 5-HT1A receptors. It nudges the dispatcher toward calmness without forcing a total shutdown of too much calm, which itself would be dysfunctional. Researchers emphasize CBD's non-psychoactive effects as a safe alternative to THC and anxiety research, maybe even a safe alternative to other medications, or at least an additional efficacious option. So after 2014, researchers became more willing to treat CBD and hemp as a therapeutic compound rather than a niche cannabinoid. This is the period where CBD's epilepsy evidence matured enough that the FDA approval of Epidiolex. CBD didn't earn its first scientific medal in a wellness aisle. It earned it actually in the Pediatric neurology wards in the lives of children with catastrophic epilepsies who had exhausted every other option. And so the credibility of CBD came not from hype or from wellness marketing. It came from the ability to do something. The question is not so much what is your brand, but it's what are you doing? It was found to be efficacious for Dravet syndrome and for Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. If we think about both of those, imagine your brain in this case is a neighborhood, again, full of houses. You can throw a party. This is your burst of electrical activity, right? And in a healthy neighborhood, the parties are well paced. But if you have either of these conditions, right, then the neighborhood overheats. The parties spiral out of control. The noise begins to spread. Lights stay on too long and people pour out into the street. And this becomes a chain reaction in which can't be stopped in terms of the neighborhood here can't be stopped. CBD enters not as a sedative, not as a bulldozer either, but as more coordinated peacekeepers who try to resolve the situation, restore a sense of order. Sending in peacekeepers, you have GABA, your neighborhood librarian. GABA is your brain's calm down chemical. Hey, let's keep the volume low. You also have what is known as the TRPV1, fire marshal controlling the thermostat. If the room heats up too fast or the house becomes overactive, CBD acts like a marshal that's fixing the thermostats. Then number 3 is your gardener. This enzyme, I believe it's called FAAH, acting like a gardener who clears up the old plants too quickly, creating barren patches of stress. CBD slows the gardener down so that the gardens can flourish. So the idea here is more greenery leads to more oxygen, leads to a calmer neighborhood. In your mind, peacekeeper number 4, sodium channels. The electrician who fixes the wiring, in other words. Especially in Dravet syndrome, one type of wiring, sodium channels, is considered to be a major part of the system that needs to be addressed. So if you have wiring that isn't sparking in the way that you want it to, you can have electrical storms, and these electrical storms are seizures. CBD doesn't fix that wiring mutations. CBD doesn't fix the wiring, but it does send in a top-tier electrician who can say somebody you trust, right? Hopefully you can stabilize overloaded circuits so sparks don't cascade from house to house. In other words, CBD is a community that cares. They're there for them. This is a modulation of neuronal excitability via sodium channels, as peacekeeper number 4. So both of these are forms of catastrophic childhood epilepsy that begin in early childhood, involve extremely frequent seizures that resist conventional anti-seizure medications. CBD's effects in these conditions are among the strongest findings in all of the cannabinoid research that came about as a result of that 2014 Farm Bill. For example, I'll cite the New England Journal of Medicine. The median reduction in convulsive seizures was between 39 and 49% in CBD groups, but only 13 to 27% in placebo groups. Significant finding. The drop in seizure frequency that reduced from 37 to 44% to 17 to 22 for placebo, a really stark finding. These numbers are not showing that it's a miracle cure. They're showing that they represent a major win in terms of the development of potential treatments. This is why Epidiolex became the first FDA-approved medication that was derived from cannabis. And so it changed FDA policy, it changed physician attitudes, and it changed ultimately the public understanding of cannabis-based medicine. CBD works here mechanistically because it appears to modulate the 4 factors that I just talked to, 4 neighborhood peacekeepers. CBD doesn't eliminate seizures, it dramatically reduces their intensity though, and if the frequency of them is also reduced. Everyone contributes a little. Together, though, they convert a hectic area into one where the person can find sleep possible. These numbers are not miracle cures. This is the most robust clinical. High tolerability, no intoxication, and the side effects are primarily have to do with the dosage. So researchers describe CBD as having a favorable therapeutic index. Scientific code for seems very safe. This is important because it differentiated CBD from THC, but also from benzodiazepines, especially from opioids, and even from other more mainstream, less controlled medications like SSRIs in some contexts. It gained academic traction, and that resulted in the research propelling CBD to this status of something that could be therapeutically, but it didn't show strong evidence for mood disorder relief, the wellness claims that came later. It also didn't show a lot of support for arthritis help. Many CBD marketing claims didn't pay attention to that trial level support. The FDA really paid attention to that. By 2022, the FDA was already saying all these things are not true. One of the most fascinating pieces for evidence is that between 2014 and 2018, we found that there was strong evidence for epilepsy, promising evidence for anxiety and inflammation, although not conclusive. Its credibility and its popularity with the public then began to switch, though, by 2018, from science that could be backed to something that was more related to perceived safety, the lack of intoxication. Both were true. Also, wellness framing, which I'm skeptical of. Okay, consumer testimonies, skeptical of. Marketing stories, don't pay attention to them. CBD became a product whose efficacy became harder to verify when it became a marketing gimmick-facing product. So by 2016 and 2017, laboratories and extraction facilities, brand startups began to proliferate. CBD moves from experimental tinctures. Companies like Sunsoil, at that time they were called Green Mountain CBD. We'll talk about Sunsoil primarily toward the last part of this episode, but they leaned to that farm to bottle vertical integration, while generic CBD brands relied on bulk isolates from large processors or hard to trace, because the law treated all of these hemp-derived products as agricultural commodities especially from the 2018 Farm Bill and beyond. Rather than controlled substances, barriers to entry evaporated. The wellness economy, already primed for non-pharmaceutical stress relief, already well practiced in promoting that, began to surge. We know what to do with this, or we think we do. And the 2018 Farm Bill, which doubled down on that. Actually, there are no more research-only limitations. Hemp and CBD are now an agricultural commodity in the legal sense. So CBD moves from intensive scientific research focus to a marketplace focus. Banks now could touch it. Retail chains could stock it. This is what shaped the discrepancy between legal hemp and the murky CBD promotions, a period that was defined post-2019 essentially as a period of credibility contests and laboratory scandals, supply chain improvisations, and the emergence of a consumer mindset that treated CBD as wellness and therapeutic experiments, all while the regulators are scrambling to catch up. In early 2019, the FDA issued its now famous round of warning letters to CBD companies for therapeutic claims that they were making, particularly those advertising CBD for Alzheimer's and opioid withdrawal. Okay, that wraps up part 1, and now check out part 2. It's already released. I'll talk to you in part 2 with the continuation of the transformation of CBD into a consumer product.